There was a knock on my garage door, and when I opened it, a man in a suit handed me a photo. My chest went cold. It was her face, but not the version I knew. In that instant, everything I thought was real about her shattered. I still remember the exact time, 6:47 in the morning. I was driving Noah to school, the two of us coasting down that empty stretch of Route 12 in my beat-up pickup, when the world exploded in front of us. A Bentley, shiny, silver, and completely out of place on that back road, lost control and slammed straight into a massive oak tree. The sound was like metal screaming, glass popping, and the heavy hiss of steam all rolled into one. I didn't think. I just pulled over, threw the truck in park, and jumped out before Noah even knew what was happening. My boy stayed in the passenger seat, his eyes wide as saucers, watching his old man run toward twisted steel and smoke. The driver's door was jammed, but I put my shoulder into it until it gave way with a groan. Inside, a woman was slumped against the seat, blood streaking through her blonde hair, her expensive heels tossed across broken glass on the floorboard. She didn't move. I got my arms around her, careful as I could, and pulled her out. She was lighter than I expected. Fragile, almost. I carried her to the side of the road, laid her down on the grass, and kept checking for a pulse until I felt it. Weak, but steady. Noah was hanging halfway out of the truck window, calling, "Dad, is she going to be okay?" I yelled back that she would, praying I wasn't lying. The ambulance showed up about 12 minutes later, sirens wailing through the morning mist. Paramedics took over in that calm, clipped way they do, hooking her up to monitors and slipping her onto a stretcher. By then my adrenaline was burning off, leaving only the cold air and the realization that I was just a grease-stained mechanic standing barefoot in wet grass, while strangers swarmed around a woman who probably lived in a world I couldn't even picture. I didn't give my name, didn't stick around to answer questions. Once I saw she was in good hands, I turned back to the truck. Noah was still watching me, silent now, like he was trying to figure out who his dad had just been for those few minutes. We drove away before the police even showed up. I thought that was the end of it. Just another morning, except with a story I'd never tell in full. What I didn't realize, not then, was that saving that woman would tie our lives to hers in ways I couldn't begin to imagine. 2 years had passed since Linda, my wife, lost her battle with cancer. Saying those words still felt wrong, like they belonged to somebody else's life. But that was mine now. A widower raising an 8-year-old boy on Maple Street in a small Pennsylvania town where everybody knew everybody, and gossip traveled faster than the morning paper. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had this way of showing up with casseroles twice a week. She meant well, and I appreciated it, but I never wanted to rely on charity. Linda used to call it my pride, and she wasn't wrong. She'd say it with a smile, though, the kind that softened the edge. Now that smile only existed in photos and in the way Noah's eyes crinkled when he laughed. I worked long hours in the garage behind our house, sometimes 16 hours a day. It wasn't much, just a one-man shop, but it kept food on the table and gas in the truck. I fixed everything. Rusty old farm pickups, shiny imports whose owners couldn't believe a guy in a flannel shirt could coax life back into their engines. My hands were calloused, my back was always sore, but that garage was both my sanctuary and my lifeline. Noah spent a lot of afternoons in the corner of that shop, sketching in his notebook. He used the same old wooden pencil his mom had once used for her small paintings. He didn't talk much about what he drew, but I saw it. Families. Whole families with moms and dads and kids standing together. Families like the one he remembered before the world turned upside down. That hurt to see, but I never stopped him. Drawing was how he carried his mother with him. Linda's presence lingered everywhere in our house. Her favorite coffee mug still sat in the cabinet, untouched. Her garden tools hung neatly in the shed, waiting for hands that would never use them again. In the backyard, the oak tree still bore the initials we carved the summer we bought the house, back when the future felt endless. Cancer was supposed to happen to strangers, not us. I taught Noah early that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you carry, like love, only heavier. That was the best I could give him, honesty, even when it hurt. Money was always tight, and I was constantly doing the math in my head. Upcoming school fees, repairs we couldn't afford, emergencies we hoped would never come. We were one bad break away from disaster at all times. But I kept pushing forward, because Noah was watching me. Everything I did, every choice I made, was a lesson to him about resilience and strength. On most mornings, like the one after the accident, I just kept my head down and drove him to school. Neither of us could have guessed that the woman I pulled from that wreck, the one I thought I'd never see again, was already planning her way back into our lives. I didn't know it, but while I was busy grinding through long days in the garage and packing lunches for Noah, the woman I'd pulled from that wreck was wrestling with her own storm. Her name was Alexandra Whitmore, and she was heir to an art empire worth more money than I'd ever see in 10 lifetimes. At the time, though, all I knew was that I'd dragged a stranger out of a Bentley and walked away. For her, walking away wasn't an option. She couldn't shake it. Boardrooms in Manhattan, conference calls, meetings about acquisitions. None of it felt the same after she'd come that close to dying on a quiet Pennsylvania road. She kept thinking about calloused hands pulling her to safety, about eyes that hadn't asked for a thing in return. On her desk in New York, she kept a small object that didn't belong in that world of glass towers and designer suits. A worn wooden pencil. Mine. I hadn't even realized it slipped out of my jacket pocket that morning when the paramedics loaded her up. But for her, it became something like a talisman, a reminder that there was still some genuine goodness in a world that mostly felt fake and transactional. She didn't just sit with that feeling. She acted on it. She hired a private investigator named Watson, a man who made his living being thorough and discreet. A few weeks later, she was staring at a report with my name on it. Ben Carson, 34 years old, widower, owner of Carson Auto Repair in Millbrook. One son, Noah, 8 years old. No criminal record. Average credit score. A quiet, ordinary life. The investigator even sent her photos, grainy shots of me bent under the hood of a car, Noah sketching in the corner of the shop. She studied them like they were works of art. She saw something in that little garage, in the ordinary rhythm of our days, that she'd never known in her world of money and power. But she knew one thing for sure. If she showed up as Alexandra Whitmore, everything would be poisoned. My neighbors would gossip. I'd see her as charity. Noah would be overwhelmed. The truth of her name would hang over every word, every gesture. So she made a choice. She started building a new identity, Ollie Mitchell. She practiced moving through the world without privilege, learning to do her own makeup, buying secondhand clothes from thrift stores, cooking her own meals. She even rented a modest apartment an hour away from our town. Piece by piece, she stripped off the layers of wealth and expectation until what was left was someone simple, someone normal. When her rented Honda Civic pulled into my garage that crisp autumn morning, I had no idea that the woman asking for help with a strange noise wasn't who she claimed to be. To me, she was just another customer. But the way she carried herself made me pause, like she wasn't used to asking for help, and the way she studied Noah's drawings on the wall, like they were gallery pieces instead of crayon sketches, told me right then that she wasn't passing through by accident. The first time Ollie Mitchell walked into my garage, I barely looked up. I was elbow deep in the guts of a transmission, sweat stinging my eyes, and to me she was just another customer with car trouble. She explained her Civic was making a strange noise, her voice steady, but with that nervous edge of someone bracing for a bill they might not be able to afford. I quoted her the price for a diagnostic, nothing fancy, just straight and fair. The way her shoulders dropped with relief stuck with me. Most people either grumbled or barely blinked at what I charged. She looked like $37 was a gift. The problem turned out to be a loose belt, something I fixed in 20 minutes. When I handed her the invoice, she smiled like she'd won a prize. Paid in crisp 20s, too, the kind of cash that smelled like a bank teller had just counted it. While I finished up, Noah wandered over from the corner with his sketchbook. He was shy with strangers, always had been since Linda passed, but for some reason, he wanted to show this woman his drawings. I braced myself for the polite nod most adults gave before moving on, but Ollie didn't do that. She crouched down, met him at eye level, and asked questions, real questions. She pointed out shading he'd figured out on his own, talked about composition and light like she knew the language. I stood there wiping grease off my hands, watching my son open up to a stranger in a way he hadn't in years. He even showed her his most prized thing, that worn wooden pencil of his mother's. When Ollie saw it, her face went still for just a second, like it meant something more to her than it should have. She recovered quickly, but I didn't miss that look. After that, she kept showing up. At first, it was always car trouble, squeaky brakes, a loose wire, a rattle that wasn't really there. Nothing major, nothing costly, just enough to give her a reason to stop by. I knew it, but I didn't call her out. Truth was, I didn't mind. She was easy to talk to, sharp-witted, and her dry sense of humor made even dull afternoons a little lighter. Noah adored her. She started bringing sketchbooks and pencils, claiming they were for her own hobby, but somehow always sliding them across the counter to him. She taught him tricks about shadow, how to make flat drawings feel alive. His work started changing, evolving, almost overnight. His simple kid sketches turned into something that looked like it belonged in a gallery. I watched it happen with a mix of pride and unease. Pride because my boy was blooming again, laughing, showing excitement I thought had died with Linda. Unease because deep down, I knew people like Ollie didn't stick around places like Millbrook. They visited. They passed through. They didn't build lives here. But still, every time I saw her Honda pull up just as Noah was getting home from school, I couldn't help but feel something shift inside me. Something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. As fall deepened, Ollie's visits stopped feeling like coincidences and started to feel like part of our routine. She always managed to show up right after Noah got home from school, her timing too perfect to be chance, but I didn't push the thought. Noah would light up when he saw her, and that was enough reason to let it slide. Sometimes she'd help him with homework at the counter while I worked under a hood. Other times, she'd bring new pencils or sketch pads, claiming they were extras she didn't need, but always passing them over with that look of quiet encouragement. The effect on Noah was obvious. My boy, who had been polite but withdrawn since his mom died, suddenly had energy again. He talked, laughed, and filled page after page with drawings that seemed to grow more detailed by the week. One evening, her Civic needed more work than usual, so she stayed late at the shop. I offered her a ride to her hotel, but Noah cut me off with a blunt, childlike honesty only kids can get away with. Dad makes the best spaghetti in Pennsylvania. You should stay for dinner. I should have said no. Should have kept the line clear. But before I knew it, she was sitting at our small kitchen table with a plate of pasta, listening to Noah ramble about superheroes and sketch ideas. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel hollow. It felt like family. After dinner, she helped clear dishes. She stopped at the framed photos on the wall, studying Linda's smile, commenting softly on how much love radiated from the pictures. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I just let her words hang there. At one point, Noah asked if she'd ever been married. She went quiet for a long beat, then said some people are meant for different kinds of love stories. I understood that answer more than I wanted to admit. It was the kind of truth you only hear from someone who's lived with loss or loneliness. As winter settled in, Ollie became woven into our days. She helped Noah wrap Christmas presents, taught him to fold paper with precision, even guided him on which gifts would mean the most. On Christmas Eve, she gave him a professional art set, luxury materials that no 8-year-old had any business owning. I tried to protest, but she shut me down firmly, insisting talent like his deserved proper tools. That night, after Noah fell asleep with his new supplies spread across the bed, she and I sat by the window, watching the snow fall. I almost asked her then, "Who are you really? Why here? Why us?" But I stayed quiet. Some part of me knew her stories were too vague, her past too carefully generic. She gave pieces, but never the whole picture. I let it go because I was afraid. Afraid of breaking whatever fragile thing had grown between us. But the truth always finds a way to surface. The first crack in Ollie's act came one night in December. She was helping Noah with an art project at the kitchen table when her phone rang. The ringtone wasn't anything like the cheap buzz of a prepaid cell. This was classical music, refined, expensive sounding. She answered without thinking, and I heard her voice change in an instant. The warmth I knew was gone, replaced by the clipped confidence of someone used to running boardrooms. In 30 seconds, I caught more truth than she ever intended to share. Acquisitions, board meetings, references to New York. When she hung up, she looked like a kid caught red-handed. Her explanation came quick, too quick. A former employer still trying to pull her back into consulting. The story was smooth, almost believable, but her eyes betrayed her. I didn't push it then, not with Noah listening, but I filed it away with the rest of the little mysteries that made up Ollie Mitchell. The real truth didn't come from her. It arrived at my front door a few weeks later on a bitter January evening. A knock echoed through the house, and when I opened it, a well-dressed man stood there, polished shoes and a leather briefcase out of place in my neighborhood. He introduced himself as Watson, a private investigator. He slid a photo across the threshold, and my stomach dropped. It was Ollie, but not the woman who crouched on my garage floor to admire Noah's sketches. This version was dressed in tailored suits, standing beside paintings worth more than my house. Watson explained it all in that professional, detached tone of someone used to delivering hard truths. The woman I knew as Ollie Mitchell was actually Alexandra Whitmore, CEO, heiress to one of the biggest art fortunes in the country. She'd vanished from New York 6 months earlier, what he politely called a personal crisis. Her family had been searching for her ever since. I stood there gripping that photo, numb. The puzzle pieces slammed together. The vague answers, the expensive art set, the way she knew details about scholarships and art history like she'd lived it. She hadn't just stumbled into our lives, she'd orchestrated it. When Watson left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at his business card. Alexandra Whitmore. That name might as well have been carved into another planet. A world of penthouses and trust funds, of board meetings and magazine covers. A world that had nothing to do with me, with my small garage and overdue bills. I felt sick, not because of who she really was, but because of what it meant, that every laugh, every moment around our table had been built on a lie. The next day, when she came by like always, I met her at the garage door. I held up Watson's card. Her face went pale. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no words ready. Her mask cracked, and what showed underneath wasn't polished, it was raw. She started explaining in fragments. That New York had suffocated her. That saving her life had reminded her there was still something real in the world. That she needed to be close to it. To me, to Noah. Her voice shook, but my anger drowned out everything else. Noah came through the door just as I lost it. I demanded to know what gave her the right to treat our lives like some experiment. My voice was hard, harsher than I wanted, but I couldn't stop. I told her we'd been fine before she came, and we'd be fine after she left. We didn't need her pity, or her money, or whatever entertainment she thought we provided. Noah froze, clutching his sketchbook like a shield, eyes wide with confusion. Alexandra knelt, told him he was the most talented artist she'd ever met, kissed his forehead, and whispered something in his ear. Then she left. I watched her car pull away, and this time I knew she wasn't coming back. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of something broken. After she drove away, the house felt different. Not in the way it had after Linda passed. That grief was a heavy, familiar weight. This was sharper, rawer. Like someone had ripped open a wound I didn't even know was still healing. Noah asked just one question the next morning. Is Ollie coming back tomorrow? I shook my head. He didn't argue, didn't cry. He just nodded once, quiet, and went to his room. Later that night, I found his newest drawing on the kitchen table. 3 figures under an oak tree. One of them had been carefully erased, nothing left but a faint outline. The days that followed felt like recovering from surgery. Necessary but painful, the kind of healing you can't rush. I buried myself in work, taking on more cars than I could handle. Anything to keep my mind too busy for thoughts of her. Noah threw himself into his sketches, but the joy was gone. He drew like it was an obligation, lines tight and heavy instead of loose and alive. Mrs. Patterson started stopping by more often with casseroles. She asked more questions than before, her eyes searching mine, but I gave her the same polite deflections I always had. She couldn't fill the hollow that lingered in the house, and I didn't expect her to. 3 weeks went by before I admitted to myself that staying in Millbrook was only making it worse. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders, her laugh at the kitchen table, her car parked outside the shop, the way Noah's face used to light up when she showed up right on time. So I made a decision that surprised even me. I called my customers, pushed back the few jobs I had left, and packed up our lives. Clothes, tools, art supplies, the basics. When Noah asked if he could bring the art set she'd given him, I almost said no. But then I caught myself. Punishing him for my broken heart would have been cruel. So I told him yes. On a gray Tuesday morning, we left Millbrook behind. No big announcement, no drawn-out goodbyes. I left the house keys with Mrs. Patterson, loaded our pickup, and pointed us towards someplace new. I didn't even know where exactly. We just drove until the road felt different. We ended up in a mid-sized city, Not too big, not too small. Different enough that it felt like escape. I found work in an established auto shop run by a man close to retirement. Someone who needed reliable help more than he needed company. Noah started at a new school where no one knew his history. To the teachers, he was just a quiet kid with exceptional artistic talent, not a motherless boy with baggage. We rented a small apartment above a deli. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without waiting for the next reminder of what we'd lost. I told myself this was our reset. Work, school, home, repeat. No more surprises. No more strangers weaving themselves into our lives. Just stability. At least, that's what I thought. Life in the new city settled into a rhythm. I worked long hours at the shop, kept my head down, and made sure the bills got paid. Noah adjusted faster than I expected. Kids are like that. He made friends, his teachers praised his drawings, and he filled sketchbooks with the same determination I put into fixing engines. We didn't talk much about Millbrook or the woman we left behind. It was easier that way. Then one cold March morning, everything changed. I was in the middle of tearing down a stubborn carburetor when the shop phone rang. It was Noah's school. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. He'd collapsed during art class. An ambulance was already on its way to the hospital. By the time I got there, they had him in a bed surrounded by wires and machines. Doctors explained it in words that didn't seem real: congenital heart defect. Something he'd likely had since birth, but hidden until now. Stress or illness must have triggered it. Surgery was possible, even likely to succeed, but it had to happen immediately. I nodded through the explanation, but the only thing echoing in my head was one phrase: life-threatening condition. Then came the numbers. The kind of numbers that make your stomach drop. My insurance covered the basics, but nothing close to the costs they were quoting. The financial counselor tried to soften it, talking about payment plans, assistance programs, options. But the truth was brutal. Saving my son's life was going to take money I didn't have and couldn't get in time. I sat in that waiting room, head in my hands, fighting off panic. I tried to calculate what I could sell, how much I could borrow, what I could mortgage. But every calculation ended the same way: short. Desperately short. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. The one person who could solve this with a single phone call was the same person I'd driven away with my anger and pride. I told myself it didn't matter. She was gone. We'd make do, somehow. I'd find a way. And then I looked up. She was standing in the doorway. Alexandra. Not Ollie Mitchell, not the disguise, but Alexandra Whitmore, and yet dressed in the same simple clothes she used to wear around us, carrying herself with the quiet authority of someone who made things happen. She didn't waste time with apologies or explanations. She sat beside me and said, "How can I help?" Just like that, the walls I'd built started to crack. When Alexandra sat down beside me in that waiting room, I almost told her to leave. My pride wanted to push her away again, to prove I could handle it on my own. But one look through the glass at Noah lying pale under those hospital lights crushed that instinct. This wasn't about me. It was about him. She didn't waste time. She explained that she'd already spoken to the hospital's administration. An anonymous fund, through her foundation, would cover every expense. No headlines, no publicity, no strings. Just help. I started to object, but she cut me off, firm but gentle. "Ben, your son's health matters more than your pride." And she was right. I hated it, but she was right. The surgery went forward, and by some grace, it was successful. The doctors warned recovery would be long and careful, but Noah had a future again. Every day, Alexandra showed up at his bedside with sketchbooks, stories, and patience. She slipped right back into his world as if she'd never left. But this time she wasn't pretending to be anyone else. She was herself, name and all. While Noah healed, she and I finally started talking honestly. No disguises, no half-truths. She told me about the loneliness that had pushed her to create Ollie Mitchell, about suffocating under her family's expectations. I admitted how my pride had blinded me, how my anger had made me throw away help we desperately needed. It wasn't easy, sitting with all that honesty. Some nights, after she left, I'd stare at the ceiling wondering if trust could really grow back after being burned down. But the thing about hospitals is they strip everything down to what matters. And what mattered was that she kept showing up. Every day. The hardest talk came the day Noah was cleared to go home. Bags packed, discharge papers signed, Alexandra stood in the hallway and asked the question we'd both been circling for weeks. What happens now? My first instinct was to thank her, then walk away. To retreat into the safe, predictable bubble I'd tried to build for Noah and me. But before I could answer, Noah, still fragile but wiser than any child his age should have been, spoke up. If you care about each other, he said, you shouldn't pretend you don't. He was right. Running away again would have been just another lie. So we made a decision, imperfect but real. Alexandra would go back to New York. She had responsibilities there she couldn't abandon. But she wouldn't disappear from our lives. She'd visit when she could. She'd stay connected. We'd figure it out as we went, honestly this time. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was the truth. And that made it stronger than any fantasy. 6 months later, Alexandra called ahead before pulling into the parking lot of the new garage where I worked. No disguises this time, no surprises, just honesty. Noah was waiting by the window, his latest sketches spread across the workbench like a welcome mat. When she walked in, he ran straight to her, hugging her with the kind of fierce joy only kids can give. Watching them together, it hit me. Labels didn't matter. She wasn't his mother, not by blood, but she'd carved out a place in his heart that couldn't be erased. The garage had a corner just for him now, walls covered in drawings that showed how far he'd come. Alexandra had quietly arranged for him to take lessons with a respected local artist, though she kept her involvement anonymous. His work was starting to catch the eye of people who understood talent. But more important than recognition, Noah was drawing with joy again, not obligation. Our life became something new, something undefined. Some weekends she stayed with us, other times just a few days. Sometimes it felt like we were a family, other times like close friends, and sometimes like something else entirely, something that didn't need a name. The lack of definition used to scare me. Now it felt like freedom. The town learned to accept her as Ben's friend from New York. No gossip, no whispers. She supported local schools and small businesses quietly, without making a show of it. Authenticity had a way of making people trust her more than her disguise ever had. Winter rolled in again, and I realized I was no longer counting losses. I was looking at what we'd gained. Noah was healthier, happier, and growing into his gift. Alexandra had found a balance between her world of wealth and our simple life. And I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes real strength is accepting help without feeling smaller for it. One morning in February, I found an envelope slipped under the garage door. Inside was a note in Alexandra's handwriting. Some things don't need to be defined to be real. Thank you for teaching me that love isn't about staying or leaving. It's about choosing each other every day in whatever form that choice takes. Later that day, Noah showed me a new sketch. 3 figures under a tree. This time, none of them were erased. They weren't holding hands, not locked together, but connected by lines so subtle you could almost miss them. Invisible threads, binding them without chains. When I asked what it was, he just said, "It's us, the way we really are." That night, Alexandra called like she always did. We talked about small things, Noah's art project, my plans to expand the shop. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced. Just life. When we hung up, I didn't feel the ache of separation. I felt something steadier. Not all stories end with weddings or grand declarations. Sometimes they end with something quieter, but stronger. The simple act of showing up, day after day, for the people who matter most. That's where we landed. Not perfect, not defined, but real. And for me, that was enough.